want to talk about space. So let's talk about the parietal lobe, where we generate the body image, and just see what happens if you have a stroke in that area. Now, these photographs come from a German painter who painted what he saw. They're very accurate. There he is. You can see he's got two sides to his body. He's actually doing really quite nicely. Now, soon after the stroke, do you see he ignores the whole of one side of himself? He cannot paint it. He cannot see it. And this is because of destruction in the parietal lobe. A few days later, 2 months later, he's beginning to be able to get his view of himself back again, but it's still very impoverished on one side of his body. And then finally, 6 months later, he's still impoverished on that side of the body, but it's becoming much more normal. 1 year later, he's back to how he was before. So these structures are understood, so we know how the body is constructed. We know where the self is generated in a very precise way. And if you stimulate this, you can produce changes in the self. But there's something called brain plasticity. And I just want to introduce you to a concept which, when I heard of it, just knocked me sideways. Because I've been talking to you very precisely about location of functions in brain areas. It's clear. Vision is here, hearing is here, feeling is there. We know that. But can we be certain of areas and function? Let me just give you two examples. We all know that in right-handed people, the speech area is in the frontotemporal parietal region there. That's normal right-handed subjects. But what happens if you're a young child before the age of 7? Well, what happens is if you damage your speech center, it goes across to the other hemisphere. Won't do it after 7. 9s won't get it, but young children will. So that means that this area in the right hemisphere is a potential speech area. All right, you say. Well, it's in more or less the same area. It has speech-like functions. That's understandable. But now look at this one. This is vision. This is in subjects who've been blind from birth or newly blind. When reading Braille with the fingers, the visual cortex becomes active. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that this area where you feel and where you feel the Braille symbols gets transferred into the visual cortex, which is not being used. So what it means is that this area now changes its function. Now, just to explain this to you, if I take one of you and stimulate your brain magnetically with a strong magnetic pulse at the back here, then in your visual field, you'll see little spots of light. They're called phosphenes. So it's very straightforward, very clear. Stimulate, get a phosphene. Okay, well, so it should be, because we're stimulating the back of the brain where the visual center is. But look what happens in somebody who has become blind, and this is 1 early and 2 late blind subjects. Now they don't have phosphenes at the back of their head. They have fingers. So the fingers feel the impulse that you give to them. Now, if this is true, this means that most of what we think about localization in the brain has to be revised. We can't have any longer a visual area, an auditory area. Oh, certainly, some of these areas do have specific functions, but the brain is enormously plastic, and the plasticity of the brain is only just coming to the fore at the moment. So if you're going to ask, where is consciousness, in a system which is as plastic as this, you're going to get a very complex answer. Here's a paper which said, look, there are so many gaps which we can't fill. Let's start at the bottom. There are cells which, when stimulated, produce the color red, and others produce green. Why is there this sensation, the qualia, of red and green? There are other cells in larger clumps which produce hearing and vision. Okay, I could have answered that. 5 years ago, I'd have said, well, they're in the visual area. That's where vision is. I can't do that now, because that can be a finger area. Do you see? So it's a real puzzle for neuroscience at the moment. And then there's this absolute gap. how does consciousness arise? So let me just end then with the systems controlling consciousness and the problems that come from it. These are some slides from our own work, and it's looking at the very, very small magnetic fields in the brain which you can measure outside. And this is a person going to sleep. And the fact that it's blue in our system means that this area is reduced. And that area of the brain there, in the midbrain and the hypothalamus, is one of the areas which controls sleep. So there's the main fibers which link the two hemispheres. This regulates sleeping and waking. When Sam was talking about the life support systems, cardiac rate and breathing, that's all down there. Balance is there. This organ, the cerebellum, which was thought to be related to balance, is now thought to be related to cognition and timing. Do you see how neuroscience changes all the time? And the thalamus related to movement and coordination. So when you awaken, first of all, the activity in that area changes, and then you get this huge excitement of cells all over the cortex. Now, how are you going to put that into the fact that consciousness has arisen? What is it? What is the subjective experience of consciousness? It's extremely difficult. Where is consciousness? It seems to be throughout the brain, distributed in various places. And Nagel, I think he was actually 74. He's a philosopher. He's a philosopher I like because he asks really difficult questions. However much we understand about a bat's brain, its sonic radars, hearing, etc., we will never know what it's like to be a bat. And this is the problem of neuroscience at the moment. However much we know about the brain, we'll never seem to be able to see how subjective consciousness arises. Neuroscience at the moment is extraordinarily good at showing the correlates of consciousness. Some nice work on psychopathy, showing that psychopaths have a different brain structure and function to ordinary people. But these provide correlates of consciousness or correlates of behavior, but correlates are not causation. Think of this. In 1957 in Germany, there was a very wet year, and the stork population increased enormously. In the same year, because they were coming out of recession, there was a huge number of babies born. Correlation, not causation. And that's where we are in science at the moment. Thank you for your attention.